Before I introduce you to my next guest today, I want to make sure that you're aware of a training and coaching resource to help you increase your productivity, clarify your purpose, and improve your communication skills. It's called the Next Level Coaching and Leadership with Purpose programs. To learn more, simply go to warrenwandling.com, and under the programs tab, you'll find both of those resources. Again, that's WARRENWANDLING.com. Now, on to the show. Welcome back to another episode of How to Become an Obstacle Buster. I'm your host, Warren Wandling, the show that's dedicated to helping leaders and entrepreneurs to overcome their obstacles, build resilience, and achieve success. And I have an exciting guest with us today to help us do just that. Howard Miller. Welcome to the show, Howard.
Warren, it's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Actually, as the number one best-selling author of Burdens and Blessings, a lighthearted approach for middle-aged folks dealing with aging parents, a heartfelt and humorous exploration of the challenges and joys of caring of aging parents, you have over 10 years of experience teaching management skills in the corporate world, and you empower professionals with tools to work smarter, not harder, to achieve great results. Tell our listeners a little more about your business.
It's probably more than 10 years at this point, but anyway.
But who's counting?
Who's counting? I'm not counting anymore. I started initially, when I started on my own, I started as a business coach. I mean, similar, management coach, but I really like performing. So I ended up going into corporate America and teaching a lot of management skills and coaching skills, but anything that goes along with being a manager or a leader. So that's essentially what my business was and still is. I took a turn about 10, 15 years ago. I wanted, as you know, the business we're in can fluctuate. I wanted something steady. And I have a financial background, so I have a bookkeeping business.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, Warren, is how much my communication skills helped with being with the business, because yes, you have to understand a little bit of profit and loss and balance sheets and all that, but you have to communicate with your clients. And I never wanted a client to say, I don't know what my bookkeeper does. And they all know because I communicate with them. So it's interesting to have that going along with, with my management skills, how they fit. So that's essentially what, my business has been.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You probably definitely set yourself apart compared to most on the accounting and the business side in reference to doing the books and doing the back office stuff because of your communication skills, which probably gives a unique approach to really connecting with the business leaders that you work with.
I believe so, and I hope so, Warren. I think it does. I mean, I've met a couple. I've actually have had some clients who they never communicated with the bookkeeper, and I don't understand that because, as we'll talk, communication's key. So,
yeah, exactly right. So, what inspired you to write your book, Burdens and Blessings?
Burdens and Blessings, lighter-hearted approach. Simply, initially, it was cathartic. It was to help process grief. Both my parents, now they lived long lives. My dad lived to 99. My mom lived to 92. But the longer they live, it still makes it very hard when they go. And for the last 10, 15 years, about that long, they became more and more of my focus. You become the parent. And when I looked and saw I had like over 350 Word documents pertaining to anything, and I just knew that this was something really initially, it was just to get it a one way to process grief. That was the initial reason to write it. Made sure my brother was good with it because there's a chapter on sibling rivalry, and he was, and what I realized from it, that's what inspired me. I mean, then it's evolved, and we could talk about that as we go on. And yeah.
So I know you integrate that also into your management training, correct? Using some of the same principles.
So that's okay. So if I could have, as a lighter-hearted approach means levity. And as I reflected on the book, because there are funny moments in the book, If I could have levity about something that, gutted me, it's like it's loss. But if I could have levity on that, where can people, managers, leaders, or just anyone in the workplace, where can they have levity, and how can that help their bottom line? How does that help return on investments? I thought there's something there. So that's, for me, it's a way of bridging the gap of what I do professionally and what happened to me personally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, in your journey, what has been the biggest obstacle that you faced as a leader, and how did you overcome it?
So one of the topics I teach a lot in to managers, new managers, seasoned managers, it doesn't matter. I mentioned communications, but one of the things is to delegate. And delegating isn't just telling someone what to do, that's dumping, right? So you want to delegate, but most people, their resistance to delegating is, well, I do it better and it takes longer to delegate. I might as well do it myself. As I started my bookkeeping business, which was a side business at the time, it's grown quite a bit. I'm grateful for that. But I was taking on more and more work. And I was sitting there, I remember at my dining room table, back there was a lot of paper. Now there's not as much, but I was sitting there going, I really need to hire someone. I have to delegate. And Warren, you know what I said to myself? But I could do it better. It'll take me longer to delegate. And that was the turning point. I laughed because it is kind of funny. You teach it, doesn't mean you do it. But I wouldn't be sitting here with you today if I hadn't delegated. You have delegation because you are giving up control. We all like control. We want it done certain ways, but it's a matter of trust and follow up. But that was I'd say that the biggest, that was my hurdle was perfection my way, but delegation is how I solve that, and with communications.
Yeah, that's if we could kind of unpack that just a little bit further, because delegation is so important for leaders, because leaders is influence. And so if you can develop the right team to build trust within the organization, then you can be able to hand off those projects to be able to increase your time. So how did you overcome letting the first step of like letting go of the task and trusting someone else to do the work?
Well, that's twofold. Well, I know how why I let it go, because it was Labor Day weekend, and I was giving up parties to work. That was the
Okay.
reason I did it. Well, I think the challenge for a lot of leaders is when they delegate, they're not sure what they're delegating. And it's really how specific you need to be, like objective versus subjective. A lot of what I delegated initially was very measurable, very measurable. Then you go on and you get, someone who works for me longer, you give them more reign. And so it may not be as concrete, or as objective. So that's where the conversations come in when you get to be subjective, because you want something more user friendly. I'm just using that as an example. Well, that's subjective, isn't it? But it doesn't mean it can't be achieved if you're having a dialogue with somebody. So that's where the communications come in. But the more specific you could be is what makes it successful. And for me, it was absolutely my time. It was I was never going to grow. I wouldn't have succeeded if I hadn't delegated. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's a good insight for leaders to be able to you got to let go of the work that you're doing so you can expend your time and effort on the right leadership skills and time and effort to grow your business.
what you just said, grow your business. My business is smaller. I couldn't have grown my business if I hadn't let some of that go. So that was a big part, but also it was spending Labor Day weekend doing work that, and the work, we all work can never, does work end, right? You could keep working. So, right. So those were the reasons. Yeah.
You mentioned an interesting word when we first started this discussion, because delegation is not dumping.
Yeah.
Um, and I often see this, as you probably do as well, with other leaders, certainly newer leaders that aren't familiar with really the concept and the importance of delegation. How can someone identify if they're dumping instead of actually delegating?
if they're frustrated with their employee and they're not getting things done, it's really a leader. And you could use leader or manager, and we could we
Mhm.
don't want to, I don't know how much we'd want to divert and what's the difference,
Yeah,
but I think there's a
right.
lot
That's a
of,
whole different topic.
yeah, it's a whole different topic. But if they're frustrated with their employees, where can they do something different? That's what it comes down to. Where can they do something different? Where can they change their perspective? And by the way, changing perspective is a form of levity. That's going back to, levity isn't just about being humor or funny, because that's not, but it's taking a different approach. So if they can realize they may not have been clear in their instructions. I just had that right now with someone I hired as a contractor. I realized I wasn't clear in my instructions completely. So you own that, and your stress level goes down because now you could approach it a different way. So one of the keys for them is they need to not just keep it in their head, but communicate with their employees on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think that's really key. What patterns do you see in how leaders tend to carry their burdens instead of breaking through them?
Well, they're stuck in their ego,
Yeah.
right? They're really stuck there. They're not thinking. When I've taught, people didn't realize a large part of the class, they were coming in for magic bullets to solve problems. Don't we all want that? You know,
Yeah, wouldn't that be simple?
I mean, as my mother got older, she just wanted to take a pill to make everything feel better. I said, well, let's try to create it, but I don't think it's going to happen. So, it's the managers, and one of the ways for them to realize they might be stuck, they have to be honest about it. Because if they feel one of their employees isn't working hard enough, everything that you tell them to do is going to be skewed by that. And they're going to be looking for ways that the employee is not working hard enough. But getting to know the employee more, the people you want to spend the least amount of time with are probably the people you need to spend the most amount of time with. I always encourage weekly one-on-one meetings and letting their employees talk. What's going well, what's not going well. Find out from the employee what they think and see if they have a completely different version than you have. But that's getting out of your ego and having to be right, which is hard to do. Well, I was going to say it's hard to do. It takes a second to change that, but it could take years to get there. So,
Exactly right. And I think that the switch is if the leader or the manager approaches it with curiosity.
and actually, what do you mean by curiosity? I'm curious.
Yeah. So I think like when you're working with the employee and you're asking the questions to get them to know them, to be curious, and then the act of listening plays a part instead of being defensive of how the employee responds, or if they bring up different we don't know what the employee is going to say, but how we set up the response will gain more information from the employee and build that trust if we approach it from a curious approach.
That absolutely, and adding to that, Warren, is a lot of the questions, and goes, as you know, coaching, ask the type of questions that people ask, and sometimes they ask such pointed questions. So I'd say try to avoid the word why, because why puts people on the defensive. Start at all your questions with what or how. Not
Yes.
not where were we going for lunch, but what or how to get right, because that one you need to wear. But you ask people what or how, it gives them time to talk. And then you have to shut up and listen.
Yeah, that's so key.
And it can be very
It
challenging
it can be.
if you're stuck in your ego, which is their burdens. It really is. That's their burdens. Yeah.
So they could have that breakthrough, that aha moment for them to let go of their ego and know that if they build those relationships with their team, they'll actually be able to grow the department or the organization.
Yes, as they see the results, it'll get easier. I mean, we all do it. We still do it. You'll have those aha moments. Might have to have who knows how many of them, but at least you get to that aha moment in less time than it would have taken in the past. Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah.
active listening is a really key skill for leaders. And a lot of leaders will say that they're great listeners, which most of the time they're just great hearers. They're hearing what someone's saying, but they're not truly listening. Are there strategies that you teach around active listening to help people really sharpen that skill?
Well, it takes practice. So you could do some listening exercises to for them to do it. I think there's a big connection though if they recognize what they're doing and willing to let go. Warren, sometimes there are some people out there who I'm thinking of one manager I had who, and I can't remember. They inherited an employee. It was a sales department, and I forgot. Now I can't remember her name. I think it was like Diane or something like that because he kept mentioning her by name and how she knew nothing, nothing. And gradually through the class, learning about how to delegate and being specific, he realized she never had training. So yeah, thought that's kind of cool. The last minute of the class, he stood up and he said, now I've got to deal with that Diane. And he walked off. And it's like, she didn't have a chance. He was more comfortable staying in that you knew nothing rather than changing.
Right,
So
because
what was that?
there's some action that takes place then on their side.
Yeah. And so it was, he wouldn't actively listen. He did for a bit, but when it came down to what he was going to do, that she didn't have a chance. She didn't have a chance. But so it really is recognizing. I say, one of the cores for motivation is WIIFM. What's in
Yes.
it for me? So what I would say to these managers who want to stay on the same thing that they're saying all the time is, well, what's in it for you? I mean, what would it be like if you didn't have to think this way? And it's kind of like, I'll go back to my moment of having to work over Labor Day weekend. I didn't want to do that anymore. What are their problems in their life? How much is their stress? What if they shifted their perception, and then I think they'll listen more.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the great things about teaching managers and leaders are all these topics are connected. Right? I mean, delegating, listening, communicating, they're all connected. They all one can domino affect the other one.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
In your opinion, how can you use humor as a healing tool?
So I will mention that humor, I prefer levity or perspective, and I'll tell you why, because not everyone's funny.
This
and
is true.
and I think when you use the word humor, for some people, it's kind of like public speaking. Some people are terrified of public speaking. This is a concept foreign to me, but it's like one of those fears that people have. So
That's what
when
they
you say,
say.
that's what I that's what I love, but that's everyone's different. And when you say the word humor, people might have a harder time. And so I try to change the word here. I'll tell you, I was telling a friend about my connection, my aha about my book and how it could help in the corporate world. He said to me, he looked at me and he said, your people have humor, meaning the Jewish people. And I just laughed. I said, well, if we're stereotyped, maybe your people don't. But let's get rid of the word humor and even let's get rid of the word levity. I said, have you ever changed your perspective on anything? He said, yes. I go, okay, that's a form of levity. That's a form of humor. So we all have that. So I think your question, how can you use humor as a healing tool, is if you can change your perspective, you can. That's one form of humor. And one question, I think we've all had moments, whether it's business or personal, all of a sudden you listen to someone and it changes all your dynamics with that person. And that's how you use it. And again, I think it affects the bottom line, whether it's just your own, but I think it ultimately, if everyone did this, how much more productive could a company be? If everyone owned it for themselves. Yeah.
And yeah, I would agree in reference to that different approach of levity in connecting with the situation, see it from a different viewpoint, different advantages to see
Yes.
how they can approach it differently.
And you have to allow that. You have to allow the space for people to do that. Right. And everyone has deadlines, and we all, I don't want to, I look at the end thing, but sometimes it's the process, and actually mostly for managers and leaders, it's the process and how you get there that's going to determine how successful you are. I don't know what your thought on this, but I've always had an analogy. The more effective people's meetings are, the more successful projects are. Because when you have structure on a meeting and you let people communicate, you're getting better end results. That's my theory.
Yeah, I would agree. I That's one of the things that I teach with different leaders of having a productive meetings, because there's so much time wasted in meetings because it's not run efficiently. And so then that has a greater impact across the organization of people spending their times in those meetings.
And don't have you found people want better meetings, but they're not necessarily taking any time to figure out how to make the meetings better?
Yeah, yes, it's a lot easier to be able to point out the that obstacle of not an effective meeting or
Yeah,
that time wasted.
right. But that's even a form that's changing perspective. So I like the question you said using humor because I really connect it with perspective. There's a for me it's a direct connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So leadership, what do you think the leadership myth or common belief you think needs to be busted?
A myth or belief that needs to be busted. Well, that you have to do everything yourself, you have to be right, or you assume people know what you're talking about. That's
Those
three.
are all three great ones. Those are all three great ones, actually.
I gave you three. You asked for one. Okay, yeah. I mean those, and again, it relates to, but and you may not even be aware you're doing that, right? You just may not be. You might be in your own silo, and you don't realize you you've brainstormed on something, and by the time you get to communicate it, it's been going over in your head or with others so many times you forget it's the first time someone's hearing it.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, repetition is the mother of learning.
It
So I
is.
like the one when you said they have to be right, like letting go of having to be right.
Yeah. That's a very hard one for me personally, but and maybe for a lot of us is having to be right. Or I don't know if I think we've all experienced this when you make a mistake and you try to deflect that it was a mistake and make excuses, and then you're stressing yourself out, and then you finally just say, well, I made a mistake, and most of the time people go, oh, okay, thank you, right? And
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, but
That's the principle of failing forward. Fail forward and often, so but at least admit your mistakes. Don't repeat them. Learn from them.
right, I like that phrase, failing forward. That's yeah, that's exactly. I mean, and we all continue to do it. That's why communication on a regular basis, particularly when you're running a team, it's not just you, it's everybody else. And so yeah, those are I think are the beliefs that I've seen have stopped managers and leaders.
So, what are a few practices you recommend for leaders who want to turn their current burden into a breakthrough?
Or into a blessing. Go back to that, man. All right. And so, I mean, yeah, thank you for that.
It could be a blessing, you bet.
It could be it could be, but breakthrough, blessing, both of them. We mentioned already, it's the way they communicate. We talked about asking more questions of what or how. Too many people ask, if your manager or your leader says to you, do you think you'll get this done by Friday? Their answer is supposed to be yes. So you say yes, as opposed to how will you get it done? So it's the way they communicate. I taught one-on-one meetings with an agenda. I give people an agenda for that. And I've gotten pushback when I say you should have weekly one-on-one meetings. Now, really, if you have 50 people under you, you can't do that. But, depending on the level of manager or leader you are, what's the average that people, you could, even if you have 20, there's usually some team leads that you can meet with on a regular basis, and you let them talk. I essentially talk less, ask more questions.
That's really good.
And at least, I was going to say newer managers and leaders, but I think it's even further than that. Sometimes you get promoted to those because of your technical prowess. And when you get promoted, you really need to use your technical prowess less and communication skills more. And so those are, I think, the things that, and it's self-awareness that would help them break through, I think.
So yeah, self-awareness is really key for leaders to be able to be aware of how they're responding to their team and how their team is responding to them.
And wouldn't it be great if everyone had self-awareness, but if you can't, that would make everyone's lives easier. But yet it does have to start. If the leader or manager is not having it, it's actually, if an employee has self-awareness, but their leader doesn't, that's stressing them out as well. So it really has to start with the managers and the leaders.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
So what authors have influenced you in your business?
Authors. Okay. So there was a stint I did, how many years ago, I was a part-time results coach for the Tony Robbins organization.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. It was, yeah, it was actually, that's a favorite word of theirs. Awesome. To say that. He's a marketing genius. I'll say that, but there were some tools that I still use today that and I've imparted in management classes, like how you talk to yourself, like questions like start the day with, what am I happy about right now? And of course, sometimes I didn't know. So what could I be happy about? So there's a lot of tools that Tony Robbins used. He has a couple of books, but it was some of those tools. I had to teach a class once called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. It's a book by Marshall Goldsmith. And this is kind of funny. They wanted me to teach the class. I go, well, I think I should read the book. Right? They didn't have it as a requirement. I said, I think I'll read the book, and I hope everyone in the class did as well. And it was very interesting because really what got you here will not get you there. That's for all of us, whether you're managers, leaders, you own your own business. You have to constantly change and evolve. And there were just some barriers that are talked about in the book. And I think if I mention one more book, it's Tim Ferriss wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, which I think is how the heck, I think it's a metaphor, but it has helped me to keep balance in my life.
Yeah, that's really key. That's a great book by Tim.
Right. I don't know how anyone can do that, but I think it sends a message. There's another one, not one of my favorite, but someone wrote a book, Never Check Email in the Morning, and I was tempted to email them to see if they responded in the morning, but I never did.
Yeah, but the principle is true. Managing the important tasks first before those low payoff activities, because that's how a lot of leaders will get stuck into doing those not essential tasks instead of focusing on the projects that are going to drive their leadership and their career.
And they sometimes do that because that's the comfort zone. Sometimes we all can do that, or it's sometimes easy to do. You just want to do it. But, there is, as you just mentioned, the 80-20 principle. Right. So, yeah, I think, so that concept of being able to balance the business, that influenced me as well, because I wasn't going to have to spend all Labor Day or Memorial Day weekend working all weekend, right? And that's what sometimes people do when they don't start to shift, which is a form of levity and humor, in my opinion.
Yeah, excellent. So I know our leaders will want to be able to reach out to you.
Oh,
What's the best way for them to be able to reach you?
well, I mean, my website is fulcrumpointpartners.com. I know it's a little long. It's Fulcrum is the little lever on the
Yeah.
seesaw, FULCRUM, and then point, POINT, partners, PARTNERS.com. And I also have a page with slash obstacle that will
Oh, perfect.
reference you and this great talk. So that's how they can reach me. I am fascinated now with combining my personal experience with something and then putting it in the corporate world. That's kind of where that's where my shift right now and what I can do differently than just teaching a class.
Oh,
So
interesting. Yeah, and I'll make sure that link, Howard, is in the show notes.
that sounds good. Thank you.
So, is that the special project that you're working on?
Yes, it's to I maybe do if it's not classes, more talks. Because I feel like I am humorous, so I can give some funny stories about experiences I had. I grew up. I feel very blessed. I grew up with humor, um, and just even in moments when my mother wasn't doing well, we just would put on a monologue from like a comedy routine from Don Rickles, and she'd start laughing. And for that moment, it felt better. So, and I felt like the connection between that and people who go to work every day, and if they could experience some of that, how much more fun would work be, and that how much so where that would lead to the bottom line. And I feel like there's a connection there. So that is where my special project is now.
Wow, awesome. Any other last parting wisdom that you want to share with our leaders today?
Well, first of all, oh wow, our time. Yes, I because I talk about these things a lot. I do. There's one more thing. When my brother would talk a lot about work to my father, because my father was kind of a captive audience. By the way, his mind was sharp. And my dad was 99. A few weeks before he passed, my brother was talking to him about his work, and my father said to him, Andy, it'll work out. And if it doesn't work out, it worked out. And we both said, that may not be how he lived his whole life, but if that's something he shared and we didn't know soon before he passed, and I've used that every day. And I have people now who say that every day. And I suggest that if more people, especially leaders, say it'll work out, and if it doesn't work out, it worked out. That's the big leap. What do you mean if it doesn't work out, it'll work out?
Yeah,
That's what I want to leave with.
that's awesome. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for sharing your skills and your talents and strategies, helping our leaders to break through their obstacles to build resilience.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you, Warren.
Yeah, enjoyed the conversation. Well, this is your host, Warren Wandling, saying until next time, be an obstacle buster and be resilient.